welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be doing a video I've done before, but this is obviously a bit more of an updated version of newer books that I've been reading, and that is books that I would like to see as TV shows. Also, just want to disclaim, my neighbours have their daughter here and she has a baby, so if baby starts crying, I apologise. Again, can't really do much about it. I also have changed my background, so I recently just rearranged my room. Let me know if you like this better. I definitely do. I think it's a lot more aesthetically pleasing, but also just a lot more space in my room and just prettier books to look at. So yeah, let's get it. Obviously, a lot of these books are my favourite books, otherwise I probably wouldn't be wanting them in a TV show to watch, but I have tried to include some that I just think would make overall great TV, not just specifically because I love them. Well, there's only really one series I've included that I love but isn't like my top favourite book, but I think would make a great show. And I'm saying TV shows because I don't really watch movies. I don't like when they make books into movies. I think you get a lot more out of doing TV shows and doing them well. As you know, I would have loved, in my last one I said Red, White and Royal Blue, which has been made into a movie, but like that is one I wish that they made a TV show out of instead. I think you can just get a lot more and a lot more build up and a lot more characterization going in TV shows than you can in a movie, because obviously the time frame. So that's my personal preference and personal opinion. If you want these in movies instead of TV shows, obviously this is all hypothetical. I don't think any of these would be made into movies or TV shows. They're definitely not popular enough for that, except for one that could have potential to be made into a TV show. But otherwise is obviously all hypothetical. So yeah, without me rambling, let's just get into it. I don't think any of these books should come as a surprise to you guys, especially not this first one. So first one, I don't want to ramble on too much because I've spoken about it so much. This should come as no surprise to you guys, but the first one that I would absolutely adore and would love to see as a TV show is The Charm Offensive by Alison Cochrun. This book I could not shut up about when I read it. I still can't shut up about it. I absolutely adore it. I think it's a fantastic book, and I really think that it would make a fantastic TV show, especially because the setting is television. Like, it's literally made for television, and that is the premise of this book. So if you guys have not been around, heard me talk about it, this book is basically set on a reality TV show, kind of like The Bachelor. It's called Happily Ever After, or just Ever After. And you have your male contestant and then obviously the female contestant, very similar to The Bachelor, Bachelorette, that kind of show. But in this case we have Charlie, who is one of our main characters. He is coming onto this show to kind of regain his reputation, as he lost his job as the CTO of a company, and his publicist thinks this will revamp his image a little bit and make people like him more. But Charlie has a lot of mental health kind of things that he's dealing with, and that is definitely one of the main aspects of this book that just made me fall in love so hard, was the depth to it and the discussions around mental health, and also just Charlie as a character. Just literally, I've said it so many times, I love him so much. I want to give him a hug, protect him at all costs. He is just so kind and caring and loving, and just seeing him develop in the book and him gain confidence in himself and actually realize his own self-worth is truly one of my favorite things to read about in any kind of book, is to see that development, but especially just see such a kind character. And then we have Dev, who is one of the producers on this show. He's normally the handler for the women, but in this case he ends up being Charlie's handler because he's able to get through to Charlie when some of the other people haven't on the show, especially with Charlie's anxiety. He really struggles with the concept of this show basically, and Dev really helps kind of calm him down and just bring him back to the present. But Dev, again, also has his own mental health issues and is a great example of someone, I've said it before, but Dev is a great example of someone who doesn't want to accept that they need help, and again his character development of realizing he does need the help, getting that help and working on himself, and then him and Charlie coming together was just, one, realistic, but two, a great representation of needing to work on yourself before getting into a relationship with someone else. Because, you know, I'm a believer in my own life that if you're not happy with yourself and able to be by yourself and love yourself, how are you going to be able to do that for someone else? And that was a great example in this book of actually taking that time apart and doing the work and then coming together better and stronger than you were previously. And these two were just so beautiful, and it was truly a love story, a romance book. This is. It had other aspects such as the TV show aspect and how the behind the scenes of these shows can be so toxic and just so dangerous to one's mental health, especially the participants that are on this show. It also talked a lot on racism in the industry, you know, homophobia in the industry in more subtle ways, especially when it comes to bisexual people, and the representation that can be very much misconstrued on these shows and feed into very toxic narratives that people already have. And I really just absolutely adored the discussions in this book. I loved the way Alison went about it. The writing of this book was beautiful. It is just honestly one of my favourite books ever. But I also think it would make a great TV show because of the fact that it already, like, TV shows like that exist, but seeing it from the behind the scenes perspective I think would just be really interesting and really cool. And then also the mental health aspect would be so helpful for so many different people that I feel like they lack that connection in TV shows of mental health representation. And then also the queer aspect of this book and that representation, and the fact that it's just two beautiful people working on themselves, coming together, meeting, and just having the most beautiful chemistry and love and connection. And I cried reading this book. I cried talking about this book. I would be sobbing if they made this a series, and they would have to do it perfectly. Like, I would be so particular about who I would want to make this series, because if they fucked it up, oof, I would be so mad, because this book deserves a TV show, but it deserves all of those aspects about it that make it so fantastic to be done right. So that's The Charm Offensive, one that I think would make an excellent television show, one that I think could really help a lot of people and have a lot of representation that I do find lacking in some areas, and one that would just be so beautiful and really just honestly like melt me a little to watch and to witness. And then we have another series that should not shock you one bit that is on this list. I have non-stop talked about it, and that is A Knife and a Blade, the series by Adelaide Blaike. One of my favourite books of last year, one of my new favourite series. The second book is out, and the third book and fourth book are coming out this year. But this has just been one of my favourite fantasy series I've ever read. It has all of the elements that I look for in fantasy and have it there. And also it's just done in such a way that keeps you so entertained and so drawn into the book and in these characters. And it's also a well-built world that is complex and would make a great television show, because it is kind of, I wouldn't say it's on par with Game of Thrones, but it's definitely has similar aspects, except that there's some differences. But it also, again, all of these books are queer, but has that more queer aspect to it and more representation that we don't see in shows like Game of Thrones, and I think would just make a fantastic show. Not only because it's queer, but also just because the story is amazing. So in this story, again, I don't want to talk too much about it because I feel like I've spoken about it so much, but we are following Ran and Matthias, who are both from different countries. So Ran, he is kind of from a Spanish-based country. These are comparisons. So the countries in this book and the kingdoms in this book have parallels to countries in our real world and have parallels to the same kind of, I guess, views and belief systems and taught, like, same, they have like similar, well, the same words from the languages as well. So Renito, he is from a Spanish based kind of country, and his father is awful, he's a tyrant. And then we have Matthias, and he is from a country that is up north that I would equivalent to Russia, and shares the same views as Russia in terms of homosexuality and all of that. And then Ren's kind of, I guess you could say, main tension point in comparison is the disrespect and treatment of women. Not saying that both of these cultures and countries have these elements all the time, but that is the main two kind of differences in their countries, is that Ren's is heavily focused on women not having equal rights and the fight for women to have equal rights. And then in Matthias's country, it is, you will literally be killed if you are queer in any aspect. And so those are the two kind of clashing comparisons we have. And again, not only is the fantasy element of this book fantastic, and the magical system in this book is definitely unique, and I love it. I think it's very cool, and one that suits the plot and suits these characters really well, if that makes sense. But then you also have the real life elements to it that unfortunately we still see everywhere in the world. Homosexuality is a sin, women can't have rights, like we're still seeing that so much in our world, not even in these two particular places, but everywhere. And I think those real issues in a fantasy setting are just very necessary to have, and done in a way that really highlights how fucked up those issues are. And it's really hard to read about as someone who can relate to both of those issues. And I think that relatability for these characters and how they are as characters and their backgrounds and how they got to where they are, I think just adds a lot to them and their complexity and their depth as characters. And then also just the fact that they're both so different, but at the core of it, they both have the same things that they want out of this life and for each other and the people that they do love. And Ren especially, I think, is a very interesting character in how he has to put up a facade to protect the people he loves, and that he has to feed into that, but his motives are so different from his actions. And then you also have Matthias, who is so just kind and loving and has so much respect, but he also has to do things to protect people, but he struggles to see where Ren comes from. But then once they kind of unpack each other's own past and their own traumas and understanding where each other's coming from, it's such a beautiful build up for these two. So like the fantasy element is amazing, the magical element, the plot line, I love all of that. But these two as characters, and especially their relationship, is such a slow burn, such a build up, such a true watching of two people having to understand each other and deconstruct these ideas that they have. And it is just magnificent. Like, it's one of my favorite relationships because it is so slow burn, but at the same time they have so much chemistry, and you can tell that these two would make such a fantastic pairing. But there's just so much at stake, and also so much they have to kind of understand about each other for that to even be a possibility. But they just have such fantastic chemistry and a connection that you can really feel, and seeing that build up and seeing it play out eventually is so beautiful, and just one of my favorite reads, favorite relationships to watch occur, and just is such an amazing time. I was so hooked. I read both of these books so quickly. I love them. They're also big books, so there's so much context and so much depth, and it's not rushed, which I really enjoy. And that's my problem sometimes with certain books, is it feels too rushed, and I don't love that. whereas this isn't, and I think it would make a great TV show, especially if it was done right and not rushed, and it would just be a great representation of queer fantasy with the magical elements. And I would literally love nothing more than to see this in a TV show and done so well. That's a knife and a blade. I'm not going to go on anymore because if you can't tell, I am obsessed with these books. And then we have one that is purely just because I love it so much, and that is Iced Out by CE Ricci. I love the tropes in this book. I love that it's college, it's hockey, it's enemies to lovers. It's everything I love in a book that isn't kind of fantasy based. And I think, again, like, let me know your thoughts down below on any of these books I talk about, but this would really make a really good TV show because it is angsty. Sorry guys, it's noisy in my neighbourhood. It is angsty, it is set in college, it has that sport element that people love, it just has that tension and that really strong chemistry between two people, and then seeing that play out, especially in a sports college based premise, would just be so much fun and a really sexy time as well. Like, this book again has great depth and great character development, but would also be a really fun watch as well. And like I said when I did my review of this book, I loved the fact that we had Quentin and Oakley, and that the perception around, I think, being queer and being a part of sports team wasn't the main discussion, and that the stereotypes of what that can look like very much wasn't these characters. And I really enjoyed that, because as much as I think it's important to discuss homophobia in sports, I think it's also good to see people who are proud to be them and be in sports without all of the tragedy that can come with that. As important as I think it is to discuss the tragedy that can come with it, I think it's also important to see people be is this word going to come out? Unapologetically themselves as well. And especially their character development in this book was so beautiful and so unexpected, and I absolutely love these two so much. I love the setting. Again, would make just a really good TV show if it was done right. And I think for a lot of people, they're tropes that are pretty popular and that people would eat up pretty well. So I don't know, let me know your thoughts. It might be selfish because I just love this book, but I do think it would make a good TV show. And then we have another series that should come to no surprise to you guys, and that is the Mortal Skin, the folk series by Mayne. Another fantasy based series, especially regarding fae, that I think would do really well because the books are so beautiful. The descriptions, the depiction of fae in this series especially is more on the darker side, but I enjoyed that because the lighter aspects of fae I feel like we see in TV, but the darker aspects I think are really interesting to explore. And these two, Ash and Lonan, as characters are just so gorgeous, and I love them so much. But also the plot lines in this series, and seeing the twists and turns, and seeing the world, like actually imagining the world is one thing, but I could just see it done and the story done so well. And I think it would really be a great series and a great TV show because, again, it is fae, it is fantasy, but the actual plot of this, there is a plot and there is a continuous storyline which develops, and we see characters develop and we see things unravel, and all of that combined just makes for amazing reading, but would also make for amazing television. And these two I think people would really love and adore, and also the setting, the description of the world and how it works, and then like I said, the plot as well would really keep you gripped and entertained. And I would have any of the Mayne series made into a TV show happily. And I think I'm not alone on that opinion. I think a lot of you guys also love the Monster series, which I mentioned in my first video. And then you'd also love the Folk series. That would be my personal preference because fae-based television, I haven't found one I absolutely love yet, and I think that this could definitely be that. Then we have another series that has just recently released, and this is a bit more lighter. I tried not to make them all fantasy because obviously I would happily have all queer fantasy shows made, well, books made into shows, because I do really love fantasy based shows. I love shows like Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, and unfortunately they do just lack a bit of that queer representation, which duh, I mean, that was the time, different times, whatever. I do think like the House of the Dragon had more. The Last of Us is a fantastic show that is post-apocalyptic but like kind of fantasy based, that is queer and is beautiful and is what makes me wish we had more representation in shows. But this one I tried to keep a bit lighter. Like I said, I really loved the first book at least, because only one book's been released in the series. It's not necessarily my favourite book, but I think it would make a very important television show. But this is the Loner series by Hart, and this is the Verse podcast series. So I personally think that this show would be really fantastic because it is more of a positive description of what it is like to be queer. And the premise of this book is we're following a group of friends who have a podcast together called the Verse Podcast, where they discuss everything queer, the positives, the negatives, just their journeys, their advice. And I think a show like that, I said in my review for this, I would love a podcast like that, but I do think a show of this would also be really fun to see the podcast side of it, but then also to see the personal relationships of each of these members of the podcast. And as much as, like I said about in the fantasy and the sport romances, as much as I think it's really important to discuss the reality and the hardships that all queer people go through, I do also think it's really important to have some positives, and that not everything is so, you know, doom and gloom, because as much as that is a reality, as much as I do think it's really important to have those discussions, I do also think it's important to have some positive representation and to just have very real people talking about life and giving advice. And for those people that don't have anyone in their life that they can relate to or they can talk about being queer, I think podcasts would be a fantastic way of just feeling some form of connection with your community and being able to laugh and cry together and, you know, make jokes that you can't make with straight people, and be able to just have fun, but also be able to talk about things that are important, also be able to get advice. And I really think that this would be a great show for the podcast aspect, which would be really fun to watch, and then to also see their friendships, and then to also just see our characters, because the first book was fantastic. Declan and Sebastian were our two characters, and again their story was so beautiful and so unique to them. And then book 2 is Parker's story, which again is different from Declan and Sebastian's story, and each character's story is going to be different. I think that would make for really great TV for the queer community, to just see different love stories, and to also then just see the found family and the friendship aspect, and to also see the podcast aspect. I just think it'd be really nice, more lighthearted, but also with deeper aspects, and then to see different characters and to see different friends. It would just be a really good TV show that I think would be a nice difference from always having more upsetting based stories for queer people, more tragic stories, which we see a lot of. I mean, obviously it's getting better, like Heartstopper is a fantastic example of optimistic television with that deep side as well, but I think this would be good for adults, because Heartstopper is fantastic, but it is definitely obviously YA, and we do see Nick and Charlie and everyone grow up, but at the same time I think it would be good to have a more mature version. And I really think the Loner, the Verse podcast, all of the books that will come in this series would be a really good example of that. I was trying to find more romance, contemporary based books that I've read that I think would be a good fit for television, and this one just came to mind because of all of those aspects that it has. And I'm sure there are others that I've read that would also be good, but I think this would offer a lot of advice and also just, you know, positives and negatives and just seeing different relationships and found family, and it would just be relatable for a lot of people within the queer space to watch a show like this and to have a more mature show as well. So those are some of the books that I think would make, and I keep saying I think, but I don't want to say, like, you know, in case you guys have different opinions, please let me know down below. But I personally would want to see as TV shows, and then I think would make for good TV shows in particular. Like, I read a lot of books that I love, but I don't necessarily know if they'd make for good watching media. I think they make for good reading media, but these ones I think would make for good watching and reading media as well. And then there's books that I haven't read yet that I also think would make for good TV, but I'm going to read them first before I open my mouth and say that they would. Let me see if I like the book first. If you guys like this kind of video, please feel free to comment down below what books you would love to see made into TV shows. I would really love to hear what it is you would want to see on your screens. Like, if you guys could have one of your favorite books made into a television show, let me know what it is down below. I would love to hear it, and I definitely want to make another one, a part 3 to this little TV show book adaptations that I'd love to see video, but I will definitely make it later on in the year. As always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for watching. I love you all so much. I appreciate you all so much. I hope you're having a good day, a good night, whenever it is you guys get around to watching this. I'll see you next time. Love you. Be safe. Have fun. Goodbye. I don't know why I'm making my intro so weird. Apologies, but I'll see you guys next time.